In the purpose of this presentation, we'd like to have a recap of where we are and where we need to get to by Christmas. This brings us back in after we've had a week's break, and it's also a busy couple of months, about 10 weeks, so we want to set out a clear path. Following that, to guide drafting, we seek your direction on policy reviews, direction on the development contributions policy, significance decision-making process. This is your opportunity to give us strategic direction about the policies. We also seek your direction about how climate change should be included in the LTP and about preparation of a climate action plan. And the last part is to discuss the approach to that have been developed based on a steer from previous council workshops. Oh no, this has come on. Thank you. Great. So that's our purpose tonight. Can you hear me properly? Great. Thank you. Right. Looking more specifically, the questions we're asking and seeking direction on tonight are: do you agree with the proposed approaches to the DC's policy, significance and engagement policy, and development of Māori capacity to contribute to the decision-making process? How do you want climate change to be included in the long-term plan, and what priority is to be given to preparation of the climate action plan? Do you agree with the early engagement approach and early engagement questions? So we'll come back to those. But tonight, we're really working in that do part of the triangle as we seek your feedback, direction, ideas, and guidance. Looking at where we are from now until Christmas, it is a busy time. So we have a number of pieces of work that are being developed. They're basically going through our funnel. We've talked about the scope and direction. Now we're looking at all the pieces that actually start to bring that into being. It's going through the works, and they are essentially our cogs, our working pieces. At Christmas time, we will have that light bulb. We'll have the information needed to produce the consultation document and the supporting material. So the first part of this long list about the DC's policy and modelling, we'll have the draft revenue and financing policy, fees and charges, financial and infrastructure strategies, discussed capital expenditure, so important it's there twice. We will have final draft budgets and rating implications discussed as well. These feed into those final 3 points. We'll have a storyboard of the consultation document, have discussed with you consultation options and their framing, and have a high-level consultation approach agreed. Breaking that down further, month by month. So we have the workshop tonight, as outlined already. Next week, we'll be coming to you with a quick post-election update. What do we know, and when are we expecting to know more? The main focus of that workshop will be on the WMMP and solid waste rating decisions. There's no LTP workshop on the 25th of October. It's a busy day with other topics, but also November is a really big month for the LTP. Now, this we mentioned a couple of weeks ago that we were working on an image to give you an idea of the different pieces of the LTP and what each of our workshops and parts of workshops relate to. So you'll be seeing this jigsaw puzzle from now throughout the LTP, and we'll have in white the parts that we are considering. So as you can see, November is quite significant. It's a line of it. And instead of bringing different pieces to you, say having an AMPS day, a budgets day, talking about fees and charges and SSPs, what we're proposing and what we'll be doing is bringing to you the activities as a whole, so you can see how it all fits together, the implications, what's proposed, how it would be measured, and look at it as a whole. So there's a lot to get through, and so we break that down over 3 different workshops. Starting on the 1st of November, there'll be a quick overview of financial strategies and infrastructure strategies. What is it and where are we going to get to? Then we move into community facilities, representation, governance and community leadership, and community support. The following week, land transport, regulatory services, solid waste, community infrastructure and property. Particularly big day. The 15th of November, we bring 3 waters to you and organisation miscellaneous, which captures all of the other pieces that we're working on. 22nd of November, a council day, but there'll be no LTP workshop. It gives you a break from it, but also allows us as officers to take all of the feedback and information we've got from you through those 3 workshops and to pull it all together so that on the 29th we can come back with an overview of the financial and infrastructure strategies. We'll come back with draft budget and rating implications, fees and charges as the whole picture of the SSPs, and early engagement feedback. We'll have that and we'll have analysed it then. What that sets up is December to be focused on option development, that final part that will feed into the consultation material. So what we have here on the 6th is a further budget review and modelling, all potential changes that have been signalled in the November workshops. So we're bringing that information back to you to discuss and to get any additional further feedback and any questions that you may have. 13th of December, this is lock the door. This is basically after the council meeting. Oh, let me start that again. I got too excited. So there's 2 parts to that. Yeah, there's the council meeting, and here you'll have another milestone report presented to you. This is about where budgets are sitting, debt limits, and higher level consultation items. Then it gets into the workshop, and this is the lock the door part. This is making sure that before Christmas we have understood and you've had all of your questions answered about the budgets and have been able to give us direction about what we should be preparing for the consultation document and supporting information. So that's a key date. We've kept the 20th of December, I beg your pardon, on there. There is space for a workshop if it's needed, but it's a couple of days before the Christmas break. So 13th of December is the key date that we would like everything by. So that is the process and what we're proposing to bring to you from now until Christmas. Today, our focus first is on supporting strategies. The opportunity to give us the strategic direction on these, which we will then take away and develop draft policies, share them with you for your feedback, and then bring them to you at a further workshop before Christmas. So, before we get into this though, in addition to the jigsaw being new, something else new that we have been trying is Lumio. So, on Friday you would have received 2 polls to help us prepare for this workshop. With the pace that LTP is moving and the range of issues you have to consider, we're keen to see if sending you these polls with the background material is helpful. What it does is enable you to say how you're feeling about the material coming up. Feeling good? Do you abstain? Are you concerned? And to include any comments, questions or suggestions for improvement. This one here asked about the policies being discussed today, asking if there were any specific policy or strategic objectives across any of them that you'd like to discuss at the workshop and how you're feeling about them. So for this one we had 5 people who participated in this, 4 who were feeling good about it, 1 who's feeling concerned. And so we'll look to work through these issues as we work through these policies. And so Lisa's sitting next to me, and I'm going to pass over to her. She's leading the development contributions work.
Caro, we might just check that at this point, do councillors have any questions, or you're okay with the pace of this? Cool, keep going.
Hopefully this one will play ball. That's all right. So we're looking at the development contributions policy. This is a full review. You recall last year we did an amendment to the current policy. This is a more fulsome review of the overall policy. In this session, I would like to outline the key policy wording changes that we're looking to implement. Financial impacts and modelling data aren't available yet, so they'll be discussed in December. It's likely that there may be a change in our current contributions, but we don't know that at this point. Likewise, we also don't know the effect of the new Three Waters regime on the policy at this stage. The amendments that are proposed at this point, and that this isn't a final list, there may be more amendments that come through as we work through the document, but first up, under the Local Government Act, we're required to make sure that the policy supports the principles of Te Horowhenua Māori Act 1993. We can consider introducing the ability to add inflation to development contributions not paid within the year that within a year of consent being granted, and to make those adjustments in line with the Consumer Price Index. Consider allowing staff to make decisions on requests for remission or reduction of development contributions. Under the current policy, the only option is to take it through Council's hearings panel or an independent commissioner in the case of a conflict of interest. And obviously there'll be the update to the growth assumptions and base data in the Three Waters amendments. So under the Local Government Act, we are required to have the policy reflect Te Horowhenua Māori principles.
So we might just take
back one slide. Shouldn't the growth assumptions which we just adopted tonight, or the sense partners, etc., just be a given, or do we actually have to go through a process in order to update that information?
No, like they're a given, but we, I think what you're highlighting, Lisa, and you'll get to it, is we have to model that through everything. But it's not like we need to seek permission from you, because of course the growth assumptions need to talk to the DC policy and vice versa.
Yeah, that's correct. The current policy just talks to the 2020 growth figures, so obviously they'll need to be updated for 2023. That's what that point was making. So we're required to ensure that the policy reflects Te Horowhenua Māori Act principles, which includes recognition that land is a taonga tuku iho of special significance to Māori, and to facilitate the occupation, development and utilisation of the land for the benefits of its owners, whānau and hapu. So development contributions, I guess, are one piece of the puzzle for Māori to be able to develop their lands. I think it's probably fair to say that council is probably the least of the issues with regards to clearing the path to developing land. It's generally banks that are the major handbrake, but we can do our part to ensuring that it becomes an easier process. We will need to consult with our iwi partners to see what changes they would like in the policy, and that can be done in conjunction with other consultation for the LTP. We've got two councils that we can draw on for their current experience. Upper Hutt City have changed their policy, and Auckland Council. Upper Hutt City have basically removed development contributions for Papakainga and Kainga Kaumatua, which is housing for the elderly, and Auckland Council have removed the reserves contribution for Papakainga, but they also have a contestable fund, which may give people more remission for their development contributions overall. Just a note on Papakainga is that I've included the tranches of Māori land in your report, in the background report, but it's not to say that we're looking to only consider that Papakainga can occur on Māori land. The district plan definition at the moment, and each council at the current time gets to define what Papakainga means. Our current definition is communal housing developed by tangata whenua and often based around a marae. It's probably in terms of the definitions in district plans, it's not a bad one, but it probably is a little bit too narrow. And so, yeah, just to reiterate, we've got there's no preference at this stage in the drafting of that policy as to whether papakainga should be restricted to Māori land only. We don't have a definition for kainga kaumātua either. If we were wanting to bring those sorts of clauses in, we'd need to put a definition into the policy and then probably the district plan as well. Just a note there.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm sorry to butt in. Look, those were really good, valid points you made, and definitely points I think we can touch on with our iwi partners and help them give us some definitions, perhaps, because you're right. Māori land, Māori freehold land, may not be the only avenue they wish to develop in, and I think there's already a project on right now here that's not on Māori land, it's actually on general land, but papakainga has been approved, I understand.
If that's the project that Te Puni Kōkiri is involved in, I'm not sure that does have consent yet. But
okay,
certainly, yep, in the background there.
No, I like your consideration. Those is what I'm really getting at, and it's how we capture what you've raised and exactly how we get some definition around it to ensure we're not closing out opportunities, I suppose. Thank you.
No, thank you for that. So this, I guess this topic is really just for information purposes at the moment. We're not seeking a steer at this stage. I think it's more appropriate once we've consulted with our iwi partners. Once they've come back with some ideas as to how we can look to implement it, then we'll come back again with an option there. The next point is whether we want to look to include a CPI adjustment or an annual CPI adjustment. What I understand at the moment is that our figures are already inflation. They already have inflation added, but there's a potential risk where projects take a considerable amount of time to complete, such as subdivisions, which may take up to 8 years, is that we lose the opportunity to take the inflation for the entire period that the project's been live. This would bring us into line with Palmerston North City.
Can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
Why CPI and not LGCI?
That's a good question. My experience with these sort of adjustments and policies has been with Manawatu District and Palmerston North, and they both use the CPI. We can have a look into what other options are, or whether it is set down in legislation what we can use. Yep, that's fine. So basically it was just looking for a steer at this stage about whether you think we should investigate this more, and we can probably come back with some figures as to what allowing for that CPI adjustment might do to the overall, in various circumstances, what it might do to the development contribution take.
Yeah, look, I'm happy to, because I think this will probably be cleaner if we just do it as we go along. So I'm happy to signal, in support of this. Be keen to look at the difference between the LGCI and the CPI, because I don't know how often the LGCI is published, that's the only thing, but that feels like it might be more useful and relevant to tracking the cost increases, because it's dealing with local government goods and services. So, but happy to take your advice on that. But keen to signal to support that.
Did anybody else want to make a comment at this point?
How do you catch rainwater in a sieve? Random, but it seems to me that we run the risk of having a development contributions policy that is like a sieve that has so many holes or potential holes in it, or exclusions or ways around it, that it's actually a lot of work and not good for much at all. I think generally it needs to be quite narrow and quite specific. And the only other comment I'd make, if you want to change it so that it includes things like papa kāinga housing, then that exclusion should apply to everyone regardless of ethnic background. For instance, make it simple, make it plain, make it equal. Those are my thoughts generally.
What about the CPI adjustment, Mike? Would you be in support of that? Is anyone not happy with the notion of introducing a CPI adjustment? Cool, that's clear guidance.
Thank you.
Lisa, I know earlier we talked through if you just go back to the previous slide, we talked through the Te Ture Whenua Māori Act, and we talked about the considerations that we'd like to have, and obviously talking to our iwi partners is a critical part of the step. I just wonder if there is any early steer or things that, like Mike's obviously offered a perspective, just checking there's I suppose no other direction you want to give us at this stage, because I think it's important we don't go and create this if the appetite's going to be this.
The only comment I'd offer is that I feel like there's a framework that's already inside the policy around social housing and other projects. It feels like this kind of project that we're trying to capture by this is already captured. So I guess that would just be picking up on Mike's point, but like what are we actually trying to achieve that we can't already achieve? So like keen to explore it, but we need a really good understanding of what's out of the current policy that we're trying to bring in, because that feels like we're saying that there's a problem here, but I'm not certain that with the exceptions of the framework that's already in place that there actually is a problem.
David, I wonder if you want to comment on that and how it's different.
Probably all I'd say at the moment is a housing action plan provides some, I guess, clear direction in terms of some of the things it's trying to support and encourage, and recognises some of the levers that council has. There's a lot of things council can't influence, price of building materials and so on. And so at the moment the policy does, as you identify, have some provision for that community housing, social housing component. But my recollection is that it doesn't go that way for papa kāinga or housing related to that. But that type of housing is something that we also look to promote through our housing action plan, and therefore, I guess by putting it on the table here, we're saying, well, council doesn't hold too many levers, but here's one if you did want to further be seen to be supporting and encouraging this housing typology or opportunity. This might be one way in which you could maybe make that pathway a little bit easier in our community.
So arguably, Sam, it would be about broadening the definition to make sure that it's not specific to social housing and its connection to a community housing provider, and broadening that definition to include papa kāinga or other developments similar to papa kāinga, we would be reflecting the intent of the Te Ture Whenua Māori Act.
I was going to say, not that I want to get political, but hello. I am a politician. Just, I guess, that notion of the whole, I'll just call it what it is because it's what's going around, race-based policies, whatever you the reality is Māori have always had to live with race-based policies and not in our favour. We have been alienated from our land, displaced from our original homes, and if you know anything about the urban shift back in the day, and I think you already mentioned earlier that banks wouldn't even look at us. Like, if you own Māori land, you don't even get an opportunity. Like, my father's trust had to change their land from Māori to general just so they could get a mortgage from BNZ. Now, this stuff is real, and we're just trying to find some ways of getting back on a level playing field. That's what this is about. And for far too long, we've just been, so it's just that some of these things are an effort to turn things around just a little bit. I'll speak for myself, my whānau, my hapu. We're not about to take advantage of anything in some new race-based policies. It's not what this is about. This is just, recognise what we've missed out on, years of trying to do something decent for ourselves to some of these things. That's all. Like, don't be afraid of this. This is not about this stuff is not about separating and giving one a leg up. We just, we want to reconnect with our land. We want to build where we should have always been, and it's just getting back to that. And not everyone will go back. This is just for those that want to.
I guess with this, we've got to start to test our appetite around what we're prepared to do and not. Because when we look at enabling affordable housing development, so yes, we can talk about papakāinga, we can talk about kaumātua flats, we can talk about social living arrangements, but at what stage do we stop? So do we talk about, will we offer DC remission or whatever to first home buyers where a title has been created? Because again, that is an enabling factor for housing. So I guess ultimately we're going to have to determine, what fits within that appetite or not. Regardless of whether we want whatever we want to call it, is it going to help us deliver some of our key priorities, and at what stage do we draw the line to say, well, that isn't it, so you pay, but this could be.
Yeah, and I suppose the intent of tonight's workshop, Lisa will obviously take you through some other specific questions, but what we asked you as councillors to think about in advance of tonight was, are there any clear strategic policy objectives you want to get out of this review? And so if there is other things like that, today's the day to put it on the table. Because of course what's important to remember is that for every DC remission we give, like that money doesn't, the need for that money doesn't disappear, that goes on to the ratepayer. So it's this kind of is part of that whole public-private split thing. And so for this, what I wonder if we could just get some specific, or if there is any direction further than the idea of broadening the definition to incorporate papakāinga. Anything else on the Te Ture Whenua Māori Act, noting that we're still going to talk to our iwi and hapu partners, and then we could keep moving along, but then come back to that broader question about any other policy intent you want us to explore.
Monique, just for me, just to jump in and hearing your explanation, then I suppose it's not so much for me around the development contribution stuff, because I suppose for me, for Māori, it doesn't actually apply if there's no pathway to develop. So I'm only just saying this as a statement because I'm actually sitting here now going, oh my God, it's almost like the horse before the cart for me. I'm just, and I'm picking up even on what Pirahita said around, Māori want the ability to actually just build on their own land. And so I'm just making these comments as we're talking, because I've got thank you, Grayson, for sending me through the the presentation because I couldn't actually see what you were looking at. But I suppose I'm sitting here now just thinking such an important conversation. But again, it's knowing that there is a pathway to get to where Pirahita pointed out, and that's the ability for Māori to be able to build, construct, develop on their land or identified land. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, and Councillor Tamihana, obviously there are, not to reflect on the jigsaw puzzle in this presentation, like there's lots of pieces to that puzzle to enable that pathway for development. This is one policy mechanism, and now is your time to try and influence that policy mechanism, because it's not a policy we can just review willy-nilly. It's something that requires a long-term plan amendment. So, like, I hear you, Councillor Tamihana, about, well, there's other things, but I would just encourage council that if you're wanting to change the policy intent of this policy, now's your time to do that.
Well, I also pick up on Councillor Barker's points too, and he's right. This is not just about Māori. I don't believe that I'm thinking or acting as such, but I do represent Māori as well as Nina. So I suppose what I'm signalling here, and it would be with some guidance, perhaps Monique, from yourself and the team, is just to ensure that we are helping and assisting to enable the constituents I represent to be able to determine their path of best movement, I suppose, if I put it that way. And that's also, that applies to everyone. I'm not just saying for Māori, I'm just saying that particularly I want to ensure that that there is a pathway and a process for Māori, and we're capturing it in this. I'm sorry, I don't know how to frame it in a policy or whatever, Monique, but I think I'm trying to articulate where I feel like we need to steer, that's all. Maybe I need some guidance from fellow councillors that know this process.
All I was going to say is, so yeah, I've looked at just refresh my memory around the policy around the remissions and reduction definitions we have, and they're narrower than I was recalling them. So I'm happy to signal that I'm keen to support taking this, that to ensure that it's sort of consistent with the policy, the thrust of the policy that we've already got in there. That is that we're trying to support and enable those developments that aren't about making profit. They're about housing people and vulnerable people, and so not making. So my feeling at the moment is that I wouldn't want to go too far on this. I'd kind of like to keep it quite targeted and consistent with the kind of areas that we've currently got in the policy around, talking about incorporated societies, charities, and other social housing developments. So sort of consistent with that theme, like enabling that. But I'm just not sure how far, where the start and beginning of this, the start and end of this is. So keen to hear other people's thoughts about that.
Pretty happy with where Sam's kind of sitting on this. I just wanted to remind people that it's a legal requirement that we do this. So it's not a yes or no question. It's a yes, how much. So we should, and I think as long as it's in line with the existing remissions we've got, yes, we should have a clause to this. It's simple. It's not really a yes, no question, and we can probably carry on.
The only other thing I'd add is that if we have a policy that basically means a developer can get away with not paying DCs for something like Horowhenua Street, I think we need to look at that. And, putting in stuff like incorporated societies, charities, and the rest of it, to me, it just seems to open up more opportunities for some people to see if they can't get away with it. Anyway. Oh, the only other thing I'd say, and this is not a thing, but I pick up on what you say, Piri, the only thing for me is that race-based policies are exactly that, regardless.
It's a discussion, sort of, right? I guess in support of where Councillor Jennings was going, and I guess the challenge that you set is really this competing aspiration we have for affordable housing for our community, and the social needs that we recognise and understand and know, and so that's why we have to have certain levers like this, because if you're adding additional cost effectively, it only then falls on the individuals or families. And yeah, if we've got to have something, not nothing, and so far this is, I think, one of the best ways we can do it. CHIPS, I believe, is what you're referring to. Social housing providers.
And Mike, just to give you some assurance that wasn't a council decision either. It was an independent hearing commissioner that decided that was a worthy application in terms of providing what we were doing in the affordable housing space. And I think it's pretty important that we maintain some flexibility in the policy to be able to, those one-off things. One size often doesn't fit all, and that making it too stringent doesn't give opportunities for things like this. And I'm sure that probably the Mabel Central that we opened today has paid significant contributions, whereas the other social housing thing, which is a completely different kettle of fish and a different proposal. There were legitimate reasons why that commission had decided that development contributions were okay to be remitted in that case. And I think it's really important that we maintain that flexibility in those different situations. There will always be the one-off type of developments that we need to consider, but if we're comfortable in the process that we're establishing that ensures that independent commissioner is making those decisions, not this table, then I'm comfortable with that.
I'm not want to make a big song and dance about this, but correct me if I'm wrong. I think Mabel Central didn't pay DCs because they filed those plans before they were brought back in.
You're correct. Yeah, sorry.
And we've already had Bishop Group turn up at the hearings for the long-term plan amendment, tub thumping that they would rather have rates remissions for retirement homes. So I'm willing to put $100 on the table right now. As soon as they start building them, they'll be looking for development contributions as well. So I'm just saying that if you have these things available, people will use them.
All I was going to say is I think we can be confident and acknowledge, Mike, that the policy, a fundamental principle underpinning the policy is that we want the people who cause the need for growth infrastructure to pay for the bulk of it. And that is a fundamental principle that sits under the DC's policy. And essentially what we're saying, though, is that there's some limited situations where actually we want to encourage, facilitate certain types of developments to happen, because this might just be the thing that tips them over the edge. And so I agree with you. We've got to make sure that the policy settings we have are tight, so that we don't just have every second person being able to access a remission or reduction. But there are some particular levers and buttons that we do want to push at a particular time to make sure that we can encourage things to happen and to get the outcomes that we're wanting to. And so, like, for example, I'll just foreshadow when we come up soon, I want to talk about earthquake strengthening and in the town centre and how what exceptions we could use there. Now, that fundamentally goes against that. Some people might describe that as corporate welfare of wealthy business owners, that we're going to be giving them a break, but we've got to balance that with what do we actually want to achieve? Do we want to pull the lever to encourage some particular behaviour or not? And so that's the kind of conversation I think we're gonna have on these different things. But we do need to have a set of exceptions to the DC policy to drive the outcomes we want to see. So, but to totally accept the fundamental principle of user pays.
Okay, so my understanding is that basically we can go as far, or we can keep the status quo with no particular remission, or we can go as far as we like with it. There's actually nothing in the requirement to change that actually limits what can be done. So there's the option to follow the lead of the likes of Auckland and Upper Hutt. There's the option to do a partial remission for, say, the community facilities portion, for example. There's also the option to grant remission for commercial activities on Māori land as well. That's another. All of those options are there. It's just basically what's going to be affordable and feasible, I guess, in this district, and what's going to be palatable for our iwi partners and the councillors.
So I think we've got a bit of a steer from the table on direction that allows us to frame up some options, talk to our iwi partners, and then come back.
The Auckland Council policy was framed on the basis that it's not-for-profit development on Māori land, whereas the Upper Hutt was far broader. So in terms of a scale, like, are people more sitting in the Auckland Council space or the Upper Hutt City Council space? I mean, I'm in the Auckland space, but yeah.
The Upper Hutt one says at the bottom, for avoidance of doubt, not for use for commercial, industrial, or retail developments, or residential developments that do not qualify as public kaianga. So, both of them are very similar. The nature is that the Auckland one has a cultural initiative fund which you apply to get your development contribution grant back. This could be aligned with the potential thing I foreshadowed of splitting the Marae development from Rural Halls Fund. I'm happy and comfortable with both, and happy and comfortable with the report, and it outlines them great, and I don't know why we're still talking about this. It all just makes sense. Can we carry on? Unless people want to keep going.
So are you comfortable where that direction is, Lisa, in terms of that, or is there more that you need?
No,
We're good?
I think that's given us a good steer for now, but
Okay.
if I can just circle back to particularly the Hinamora Street development. I was the reporting officer on that one. I did actually re-review my report on that today, and I did note in there that our policy at the moment doesn't allow, if I take a step back, the applicant in that case had a 15-year contract with the Salvation Army for the provision of social housing. So we considered that 15 years out of a 20-year policy was a reasonable amount of time. But if we did note that there isn't any provision in the current policy that if for any reason an activity that gets remission on the basis of being a social housing provider, if that contract falls over, we don't have the ability to reassess. So I wondered if there's any appetite for us to look into whether it's feasible to have a clause in there that if that falls over, then we can seek to catch back, obviously, the rest of the, on a pro rata basis.
Isn't that right? I've used a couple of times tonight, yeah.
I don't think there would be anybody that would disagree with that sort of sentiment.
So then just the last point was in the matter of consideration of reviews and remissions. So the policy at the moment does only allow for the Council Hearings Committee to hear these requests, and also independent commissioners in the case of a conflict of interest. It can be a costly process. Currently there's a deposit of $3,200 required, but with officer reporting and other fees it can climb up to much more than the deposit. So we're suggesting that possibly we could amend the criteria so that council officers can consider these requests. I have said there, except in cases where there's a conflict of interest, but giving it further consideration, I think we could just have the option for council officers to consider. It doesn't need to be an absolute, that it's either council officers or, because in a case of a conflict of interest, it would obviously be an independent commissioner.
Yeah, or even where the cost of the deposit outweighs the remission. So there's been a few instances as we kind of brought DCs in where some people where it was not a large scale development, just turning one unit into 2 units, and there's been times where they've wanted to challenge that, but just the process alone and the deposit has put them off challenging it.
Can that not be brought though to? I think the initial thinking was that the hearings committee of council would have some involvement in terms of that, and I wondered. I don't necessarily want to create another committee, but I wondered whether even the members of the governance members of the PRG could even be involved in terms of being party to those decisions as well, because I do think there's a degree of public interest that might be satisfied by having at least some governance input into it.
Okay. I just wonder if an alternative would be to adopt the recommendation that council officers consider it, but with the right of an appeal to the hearings committee. In the very early days of development contributions, we morphed into that scenario, I think, David. Yeah. So I just feel that might give that flexibility in terms of natural justice, that right of an appeal to the hearings committee if they're not happy. Any thoughts on that?
So as in someone could ask for a review, council officers could do the review and have the delegations to make the decision, but the applicant, if they were unhappy with that decision, could appeal it
to the hearings committee. Yes. But Dave, do you have?
All I would recall from that period of time was I think it got to a point where I think it was a little bit inundating. if there wasn't a sufficient threshold to the appeal or to the review process, then I think you could set yourselves up for quite a lot coming in and have to do quite a bit of work to, in some cases, just say no for good reason. So I think don't mind the process. I think it's about just getting the thresholds right in terms of work, so you don't set up yourself for a lot of.
No, that's fine. I guess there is a cost to the appellant, so that in itself means that would be a bit of a deterrent, that they'd have to really feel it was a strong case because it will cost them.
My thinking is more about the remissions that might be granted rather than those that might not be granted if people can appeal to it. And I wondered whether pretty much the suggestion about the rates remission was the $10,000 type of figure. And my thinking is maybe we could introduce some sort of figure like that reflects, at least some oversight. I'm not talking about trying to reduce the delegated authority of the officers, but just conscious that there would be, we might get some pushback from the community if remissions to development contributions were made and we weren't party to them. That's all my thinking is, and I just wondered whether we could sort of impose some sort of level that it might come back to this table.
Random thought. Why can't we use an existing committee like the community grants and funding. They're used to weighing up information, making a decision based on criteria and coming up with a result. There's no hearing cost or anything like that. Why is that too much bureaucracy? But could we pilot it, put it in and try it?
Given we've had one of these and we're going to have one more, and yeah, sure, we might have more in future. Can we delegate the staff to make the assessment, and then can it just come to a council meeting and committee as a recommendation for approval or denial? Like we do with all our other remissions for rates and all sorts of other. That would make sense to me.
And acknowledging that we would still make sure that the policy reflected something that said where conflicts of interest exist, that it be carried out by an independent commissioner.
Yep.
David, do you want because that's essentially saying rather than it going to the hearings committee, it goes to council. Yeah, well, you're not really delegating it to council officers. You're choosing not to delegate that responsibility and keep it at governance level.
Reasonably comfortable with that. I think the only probably downside I can see is that it then just needs to fit in with the council meeting cycle, whereas the current process where it goes to the hearings committee, that can obviously be set up in a more time-based way to fit in. So it just might mean a slightly longer wait for the developer in this case to get an answer from council from that process.
The only note of caution there is through the appeals process, or whatever we want to call it, it's about hearing the evidence and testing the evidence, and that is very much a hearings process. I worry about it being an item on an order paper for a council meeting. To me, that's not the forum to do justice to what can be quite a nuanced thing that needs to be tested properly. So that's just my thought.
I'm in Deputy Mayor Allen's camp on that. Just with that whole hearings process, appeals, it's far more, dare I say, thorough than just another item on our agenda.
Well, what's the sense of that?
I don't particularly mind either way. I'm almost happy with it being at a staff member level, as long as are they notified? Where's the notification point if somebody wants to raise an objection to it? Is kind of that catch point needs to exist somewhere.
The current process, whilst the hearing is notified, there's actually no opportunity for any member of the public to participate. It's simply between the hearings panel and the applicant.
I remember an objection by one of us.
And I think that this is where, as elected members, you've really got to think about your responsibility of setting policy with the expectation that policy will be implemented. And so, if you want an objection process, you're better to actually just have the decision making sitting at the council table, because that would infer that actually there's not enough confidence in the policy settings to have trust that the policy is going to be implemented. One of the things that I'd probably get the table to consider at the moment is, and Mayor Burney just kind of commented on it earlier, is so you've essentially given the organisation delegations on remissions for rates up to $10,000. Rates is one funding mechanism. DCs is another funding mechanism. Is there something different about DCs to rates that would mean you wouldn't want to apply maybe the same methodology that said, well, actually, we're prepared to give the organisation delegations up to 10,000. Where it's a remission more than 10,000, then it is heard by the hearings committee. And then you might have a trigger, Rogan, for example, that where the remission is more than, I'm making a number up, 100k, then actually the hearings committee doesn't have delegations and it sits with council. That's another way of looking at it, is having like a tiered model.
Yeah, I like that process. That sounds good to me. Yeah, my concern is if it's a remission for 10 houses and each of those is 9,000. But yeah, as long as that's captured, yeah.
See some nods.
How do people feel about the pyramid scheme?
I'm probably more concerned about the sieve that Mike talked about, if anything.
I'm comfortable so long as that independent is there, because yeah, for sure. And if there's because if it went to council for the 100k whatever, and maybe 2 of the 13 had the conflict, how does that work? Or are we all conflicted? Is it to the point of quorum, or how do you?
Yeah.
Because how we've dealt with the plane trees, independent, simply because we didn't want to. How far do you go?
I think we can come back with some, based on the sentiment of the table, we can come back with some policy descriptions of how we could implement that.
Cool.
And I know we want to move on, but I just had 2 notes from having read the document just about on DCs, the need for a northeast live-in catchment, because that's policy settings, right? So because there's been some quite identifiable projects in that catchment, and then whether we need any other new catchments for any other growth areas. And then the other thing was around, I was hoping to get a sense of people around the table around that policy objective of a short, sharp remission or reduction for earthquake strengthening in our town centres to achieve some of the objectives that we're looking for. I'm not talking about something that's long lasting. It needs to be short, sharp. Here's the incentive. You've got a window. Go for it. Otherwise, it closes.
So, Sam, I'm just thinking earthquake-prone buildings are already in existence, so why would we be imposing development contributions on already multiple?
But yeah, because if they hypothetically were changing what is one current commercial or business operation, and they're turning that into a mixed residential and commercial, or they're creating additional units of demand, that triggers DCs.
So take out the laneway concept that was presented to us a little while ago. In my mind, that would attract a whole bunch of DCs. And so what I was asking at the table was, what's the appetite to say, if we want to see those things happen, and yes, these things will put more demand on capacity in terms of wastewater, drinking water, that kind of stuff. But in terms of the actual, they are existing buildings. We're talking about replacing something with something better. And so if we really want to incentivise that, and we really want to get rid of these earthquake-prone buildings, let's have a short, sharp window of some really attractive settings to incentivise the behaviour. So it doesn't help with Mike's sieve argument, but it's the pitch is that it's really short, sharp, and it's got some quite a specific objective. So maybe I'm talking about 2 years, 3 years max.
My initial reaction is no, to be honest. And I say that with it, as much as I want to encourage that sort of investment, we're not talking about replacing, we're talking about replacing and growing. And so we're adding quite a bit of significant growth to that. Sure, earthquake-prone buildings and, have got a part to play. I'd rather see that happen through maybe rates remission rather than DCs. If we're not replacing, but we're actually adding to the infrastructure demand, then my thinking is that does need to be part of a development contribution.
So I've got a...
Can I just answer, Justin, the mayor, just to provide, I guess, a little bit more context, is that, like, right now, if you're an owner of an earthquake-prone building, you're sitting there going, I've got a clock on me, and in front of me I've got demo cost, I've now got DCs, and I've got a new construction cost. Like, the more we can do to remove some of those barriers, I'll put it, the more likely it is that person's going to go, okay, yeah, well, I'm on the top, I'm on the clock, but actually here's some real good incentives in front of me. I'm going to make my move now, and I'm going to make it happen sooner. And I think that's a real positive for us as a district, and we're killing the earthquake-prone building risk. So it's about risk as well as opportunity. So I'll stop doing the sales pitch.
Yeah, and I don't want to get into debate. If they're locally owned and operated developers, I'd say I'd have a different thought to some developer coming from Wellington and taking advantage of the investment opportunity and potential that we're creating by whole lot of different things, and not absolutely contributing to it. So, but happy to explore the concept for sure.
So my 3 cents worth, I think there was 2 words missing out of that conversation, and that was preservation and maintenance. So I hear what you're saying, but I think if you were going to consider the conversation that's been said here, if there was an owner of a property that wanted to preserve and maintain their building, and it could be for historical purposes or whatever, then I think that a relief of such nature as we're talking should be considered. But I don't think it should be a blanket one for everyone, because if you own a property and you want to get rid of your building and you want to build new, then I think that that's a completely different scenario. So that's my 2 cents worth. Preservation and maintenance, and how we short, sharp, succinct support those people that want to maintain what they have. Kia ora.
For once, I agree with Sam. Yeah, I would love to see a remission for medium high density housing in earthquake-prone buildings on Queen Street.
Oxford?
Oxford Street. Yeah, thanks. It's getting late, team. Yeah.
Same. I support it.
Could we just do a show of hands just so we got some direction? I think there's consensus. Yeah, okay.
Let's move on to our next policy.
Okay. It is an exciting one. Significance and engagement policy. This one wasn't one that we considered when we did the LTP amendment. So I just wanted to provide you with some background about what it's about, the intentions, and then move into proposed amendments. So the Local Government Act requires councils to have a significance and engagement policy as part of the LTP. It's about ensuring that the public has an opportunity to have a say on important issues and issues that affect them. It helps councils work out how significant or important decisions are and how we should engage on them. It's used for all consultations and engagements in the early stages as we're doing the planning. So, the Local Government Act sets out what it must include, and it must include Council's general approach to working out the importance, the significance of proposals, and decisions about issues, assets, and other matters. We also need to set out the criteria or procedures used to work that out, and how Council will respond to community preferences about engagement. What do we know about how people like to be engaged? Including the form of consultation that may be desirable, and how Council will engage on other matters. So not everything is significant, and this covers off that as well. How it's used. You'll be familiar with each Council paper. It has a line in it stating whether or not the decision is significant in terms of Section 76 of the LGA. That's this piece. When developing a project and communication plan, we use it to help determine the extent and how Council should be engaging. There's a range of ways that councils use these policies. Some are set up for as a guide for elected members and officers, and others are aimed at the community, letting them know, specifically speaking to the community, about what they can expect and what they can expect to hear about. So, even with the guide, it can be difficult to pin down what is significant. Some councils add thresholds as a further guide, while there be a number of factors influencing whether a decision is significant or not. It can provide a level of clarity and is often used for financial impacts. So Council, in our current policy, it says that we consider all decisions to be significant unless the impact on these 4 bullet points is either minimal or unaffected. And so while that provides some guidance, it's possible that we could make it even clearer and give some greater clarity. So several other councils take this approach. As intimated, minimal and unaffected can be open to interpretation, which make determining the right approach difficult. How minimal? Is unaffected unchanged, or is it not reduced? So, a couple of examples about how other councils do this. Kapiti uses it, and they have a percentage of capital expenditure for capital expenditure of greater than 25% of the value of a strategic asset. That triggers significance. And also for capital or operational expenditure of greater than 5%. Other councils use different measures, and we don't necessarily need to agree the size of the threshold today. We could come back to you with options. But looking for a signal as to whether this is something you would be interested in considering as part of our policy to give greater guidance. Now, so on that, we could pause there and discuss that one before coming to the other smaller amendments, if you like. Would members have an opinion on whether we should include thresholds or not?
I think our policy doesn't suck that much as is. I like the nice table that Wellington have in their one of low, medium, high rankings to work things out. Slightly better than our table. I would support a finance threshold being added.
There's not a lot wrong with our existing policy. It's just one of those things. Do we follow it? For example, a strategic asset in that table includes reserves, and even in that flow chart, it references if there was a decision to transfer control of a reserve that triggers or fits the determining of, which actually we didn't do recently, more golf links, and furthermore on under 5.4, that little star is quite specific there, which reinforces again we hadn't followed the policy under that particular item. So, and then there's just the usual updates it requires, like under 5.5, there's a few missing under those bullet points. I'd have to have some more information around these sort of things you're proposing, because I wouldn't say yes just like that.
We can provide more information with some different options and implications.
So yeah, I support what Rogan said. I do quite like some of the threshold descriptions in the Capity one, but the approach, I don't think the policy is fundamentally broken. It's just tweaks.
Okay.
Cara, the question I would ask is, what are the other things other than financial that might trigger a significance policy? I mean, there are public interest topics that we may consider non-financial, but in fact, the public interest is extremely high. And I just wonder, is there some sort of threshold that might be considered for those sorts of things? Does a good job of that. Okay, all right, cool. Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for raising that point. I was thought about that too. The other reason I sort of was looking to support a review of this policy, it was actually in conjunction with some of the risk stuff we were doing, risk appetite, and sort of how that aligns with this, because what we consider a big deal in one needs to be the same in the other, otherwise what's the point? I just wanted to see more of that alignment.
Great, thank you. We'll follow up on that and come back to you with some more information. Okay. And as you're commenting that other amendments are more in the tweaking stage, so other proposed amendments is there's a section engaging with Māori, and we would look to align that with developing capacity for Māori contribution to decision making, which is the next topic that we'll discuss tonight. But we want to make sure that we're providing consistent information right throughout all of our policies. So an update to that, and also updates to wording in a number of places, adding a couple of bullet points about community preferences, engagement methods, adding in our citizens forums, and just explaining in a little bit more detail what whole of asset approach means, and when council may or may not engage. So that's like if another piece of legislation trumps it, there's making sure that we've got those all listed, and also it already includes if we've got enough information that we've already asked the public about particular issues. We're not going to go and ask the same question. Good.
Cara, just one thing. So in our current engagement policy in 5.7, it's got engagement activities and it's the table. So it's got inform, consult, involve, collaborate, empower. It's the IAP2 engagement spectrum. I'm just wondering whether we should align it to the likely table or that spectrum we might use for the Māori engagement framework, like so similar to the Waikato Regional Council and the guideline that we sent around. I've forgotten the name of it, but because it's a real opportunity just to align it so that we're talking using a common language, a common thing, and we're not having different things for different groups and different.
Yeah, and that IAP2 model is the model also in the Waikato Regional Council. The only thing I'd say is that just remember that as we kind of journey on our Māori engagement framework, iwi might have a different view on what that continuum looks like, because remember the Crown entity, their guidance has a different model that is essentially the same thing, it's just different language, and so I just wouldn't want us to predetermine an outcome of the framework. But and this is where kind of the sequencing of getting this policy and the Māori contribution to decision making policy reviewed, and then the Māori engagement framework follows, and then we've got to go back. Yeah. Well, no, you're asking us to be mindful of it, and I think that's an important perspective.
Thank you. That's been really helpful. So from there, we move on to the development of Māori capacity for contribution to decision-making policy. And a reasonably short one on this. It was updated in the LTPA, and so members will remember that process. The work on the Māori engagement framework is progressing as a priority and was discussed with you last week. Wanted to assure you that all of our pieces of work are aligned. Araha is leading both of these for us, and so that the work there will filter through, and what is agreed through that process will inform this policy, but as Monique just mentioned, the differing timeframes. So what we're proposing here for this piece is minor amendments only, and that it be fully reviewed after the Māori engagement framework is completed. Would you be happy with that approach? Yeah. Great. Thank you. Right. And then we move on to climate change. So I think David will come and join me for this one. So climate change. Climate change is one of the areas that Council has identified as a delivery area in the Chief Executive's KPIs. In that, climate change will focus on two areas. First, the reduction of Council-controlled emissions. This year, implementation of a framework to monitor and measure emissions, noting that additional funding will be required for this. I've just copied this out of the KPIs. This includes a council energy efficiency saving of up to 2.5%, and in future, a reduction of emissions by 5% within existing budgets, and a council energy efficiency saving of up to 5%. The second area is under policy setting and actions, that an updated climate action plan be presented to Council for direction by June 2024. Work that we are doing includes work on the joint climate action plan, and Council supported further participation in this earlier this year. Officers are also working actively to develop a framework to monitor and measure emissions, and we intend to bring a paper to Council in December to ask for funding, as is noted in the KPI task. Where we are today. A couple of weeks ago in the activity issues and challenges discussions, members were asked through Slido whether to increase funding in the LTP for climate change or to keep it the same. There were 12 elected members present, and the result was split 50-50. That's different to the direction given through the KPIs, so today we're seeking your direction about a way forward. We seek your direction today as to whether or not a placeholder budget should be included in the LTP to meet the KPIs set out earlier this year. For example, it could be done in the same way as it was for the Live-In Town Centre. An amount of money could be added to the LTP for years 1, 2, 3, with emissions reduction identified and additional projects to be identified following the direction provided through the Climate Action Plan. We also seek clarification about whether Council wishes to progress a Climate Action Plan. This is so we can ensure resources are spent on work Council wishes to progress. And just the note at the bottom there, without that clarification, we're a bit nervous about doing this work, as the original Climate Action Plan was presented to Council, workshopped, and then not progressed by Council. So, Lumio, this was the other poll that we included in the material sent to you on Friday. The question was posed about whether members supported inclusion of a placeholder budget. Half of members responded that they consent, and 6 are undecided. It gives us roughly that 50-50 place that we were just a couple of weeks ago. So to get a clear steer from you today, I'll go back to the previous slide and open it up for discussion.
Stoked to hear that a plan was presented in 2021. Do you want to just represent that? Can we see it? Do you want to send it to us anyway, if it exists? Because, I assume it was just not adopted because of the people around the table, but it might also suck. But if it doesn't suck, we could just adopt that one and then we'd save a whole lot of time and work. I don't need to say anything else. You all know my position on this.
For me, I have no wish or desire whatsoever to progress a climate action plan. Full stop.
Yeah.
Kia ora, everyone. I had a couple of points. One is I support what Rogan said, and if there has been a plan already put before this council, then that for me certainly fast tracks where previous council may have been at that point in time, and it seems like a lot of money and resource to probably have put that together, which is worth us having a look at. Two, I suppose the question's really, I wonder why we were involved in some of these other groups. I just think about Horizons, Mayor Burney, and I think about Wellington Regional and the climate change action groups. And I think there's so much resource and time that's already been put out there around climate response. And I just wonder, when do we not draw upon these types of places and spaces? And, surely they must have an outcome that they can present something diligent that we participate in to give us some guidance. But I'm also aware, we sit here and we talk about Mayor Relief, Disaster Fund, tornadoes, events. We talk about council not having a budget should another weather catastrophe hit our district. We know there's pressures around insurance companies and all these other things going on. So, and I also hear what Mike has to say too, but my heart of hearts is telling me that I don't have any issue dedicating something to this process, even if it's something in the LTP that we resource and it sits there. If it's not used, immediately, but it's there anyway, should something occur in our district, it's out of our control. I'm almost amenable that it's almost like a backup in times of matters where climate has impacted us. So that's all I wanted to share.
So just two comments from me, which is so first, we did include those climate aspects in the CEO's KPIs, and we did that because there was a desire to, as I understood it at the time, to make sure, there was some strong voices around that, and that we took an inclusive approach and we included it, and there wasn't significant debate around including those in the KPIs. So we there's an argument that we need to live with those and see those through. I will say that the climate action plan that was brought to council in 2021, I was one of the people that didn't support it, because for me at the time the issue was that it didn't have any cost or didn't have any understanding of the cost or implementation associated with the actions. And for me that was a problem, because it might be that I'm quite willing to support 1 through 5 actions that have have a cost of a price tag of 50 grand, but if actions that get included in that action plan have a price tag of $1 million, that's a different story. And so there's kind of a sequencing piece here as well, where we kind of need to understand what might go in the action plan, what the size and scale of those things are, to then understand, well, are we willing to make an investment? Because so it's a little bit chicken and egg for me, but yeah.
Which is kind of the case you were also potentially in a few years ago around Live in Town Centre, and the same situation we're in now around the blueprint, where we don't, yes, you'll have a cost and implementation plan around Town Centre and blueprint soon, but you're not going to have that for the climate action plan, but prior to the LTP. And so this is about testing the table and saying, well, the risk is that June 24 you adopt a climate action plan and we have no provision in the budget to implement it because we've not put a placeholder in. And so this is simply give us some guidance. Is it safe? That was the way we framed the Lumio poll, only because that was a title on the Lumio poll and it sounded cool. Is it safe for us to put something in the budget as a placeholder, or are we steering away from it? And then if we are steering away from it, we do want to have the conversation, okay, so are we still putting energy into this climate action plan?
So in the August risk committee meeting, there was a report done around our insurance renewal valuation methodology, and within that, this is like page 61 onwards, there is a natural disaster risk assessment for Horowhenua, and it goes through things like tornadoes and cyclones and what are our real risk. Our biggest risk, according to that report, is earthquakes. It even goes into detail around the driest month of the year, February, the wettest is June, like down to the detail. It's there for you to read, and it, for me, solidifies our limited requirement around certain resourcing where it concerns this. So when we're thinking about how we ensure going forward in that mixed approach, it's not a matter of having to put in new money, it's just shifting existing budgets and putting reserves differently. Now this is asking for more, and it's the more that I'll put a question mark next to, so long as it lines up with this report I'm referring to and what our real risks are, because we're not one of those, according to this and the experts and the information and our emergency manager, earthquakes number one. We don't have the erosion risks like other communities. That's kind of top of their mind. That we're not in that camp. So we need to be Horowhenua specific and fund accordingly to that, not just climate change and just throw a bunch of money at it. I'm not prepared to do that.
Do you think we could invest in stopping earthquakes, given they're our highest risk? If we could, would we?
Yeah.
Look, you all know where I stand on this, so I don't need to argue that too much. But a climate change action plan is going to have sustainability at the core of it. It's going to consider the foreseeable needs of future generations. It's going to look at avoidance, remedy, and mitigation of adverse effects. It talks to the ethics of stewardship for the environment, our whenua. It takes into account that we've got a consultation of participation process for our community. There has to be a line of fiscal responsibility around it as well. We're not talking about a plan that all of a sudden all of our council officers are going to be driving around in EVs because it fits within a climate change piece of work, right? It's about long-term decisions, that decision by decision, when we've got a framework and when we've got a plan that's going to have an impact. I got a case example here that goes back to 2003 where the Christchurch District Council examined the potential impacts of climate change on the Avon River catchment and the associated coastal areas. And as a result of that action that they took in 2003, they've made changes towards their district plan that allows for minimum floor levels for buildings, subdivision restrictions, stock bank improvements and tidal barrages. That was 20 years ago. And we're still sitting here thinking about, do we invest? What do we do? We've got to start somewhere. We've got to start now, because the parameters that we put within a climate change policy is going to influence what happens in 20 years' time, 30 years' time, 50 years' time. And not having a plan isn't an option.
Beautifully said, Councillor Grimstein.
Is an option, because I don't know whether we're going to get the guidance that we need to get, is an option that we bring a formal report to the Extraordinary Council meeting and councillors publicly debate this understanding orders. Because I'm concerned that as officers, on one hand, we're to write a climate action plan, and on the other hand, maybe not, because we don't want to give provision to it in the LTP. And maybe the direction of council at that meeting will be, no, we still want the climate action plan and we still want the emission framework, but we don't want to put provision in the LTP just yet. And that can be the will of the table. But I just, we attempted to frame the poll and then frame this conversation to try and get a steer, but my sense is the steer is probably still going to be split. And so we're best to put it into a debate.
I'm not too sure what putting it into a debate, given conversations had around the last 12 months, will potentially achieve a difference on a 50-50 split. It's either we're prepared to do a plan and commit some funding towards it, albeit probably much smaller than what we should be, but show of hands, otherwise pull it.
And it heavily depends on who shows up on the day. I'm was very agnostic around the idea for a number of reasons, which I won't rehearse now. But I think, Clint, some very, very sound points that you've made, and I also particularly like Piri's point about being smart and being specific, tailoring it to something doable, achievable, recognising the peculiarities of our district. So there's an impression. I wonder if we could do that rather than go to the formal report stage. That's just my view.
I thought, well said, Clint, all for the climate action plan.
Cara, I suppose this is a question for you, because I've stayed out of this argument because I've, sort of my involvement with the Horizons regional thing is the sense that I get from that is that a lot of, just about every council wants to advance a climate action plan. They're just scared. Well, no, they're all, but we've suggested that we're in favour of that as well, but the scare is the cost and how that is going to be implemented. I mean, 2021, the climate action plan I thought was, as on reflection, was titled incorrectly because it wasn't a plan. It was just a strategy that said we acknowledge and say that climate action is a thing. We need to do some further investigation and carry out reviews in terms of that. And for council to say, oh, there's no costs attached to it, so we can't support it, I thought, was a bit of a side way of saying, well, I don't want to acknowledge that climate change is a thing. But anyway, that was then. I think we've moved on a little bit now in terms of, especially with the weather events that we've had over the last few years, that we acknowledge that climate change, and for me it's not climate change, it's too much rain, not enough rain, and the impacts that might cause, or other weather events that do happen, how we actually manage those. And now I think the time has come that we need to seriously consider having a special fund that will deal with those sorts of things. Because in the past, we've said, oh, we're building a wastewater treatment system over here. We'll include the climate action plan, the climate action as part of that. We'll acknowledge it's there. We won't put any money towards it, but we'll acknowledge it's there. And then it gets forgotten. And until we actually steer that away from saying, okay, we need to acknowledge that climate action is a thing, and then that we need to properly sort of investigate what the impacts of that climate change might be on those particular projects. The other thing that I'm thinking of is the emissions side of things, and they almost need to be separate. The emissions thing I see, with the pool and those sorts of things, I think they could be definitely built in as separate projects and allocated funding towards, separate from even a climate change thing. But, it's in the same sort of bunch of money, if you like. But the challenge is that councils are scared of allocating a deal of funding to projects that might happen or they've got no control over, and then that funding, how much should that be, where it should be allocated, if it adds, if it's $1 million, that's 4% or 5% of rates, and all of a sudden people get very nervous about that sort of thing. So trying to balance all that is really difficult. But in terms of that, I've asked Dr. Horowhenua Smith, who is the co-chair of the Regional Horizons Committee, Climate Action Committee, plus Jonathan, who is a iwi appointed member to that committee, Jonathan, Councillor Proctor, and myself. There was one other, obviously. Anyway, I'm seeking their input in terms of how they think we might progress something along those lines. So, definitely the conversation's there and we need to continue it. But I would support some sort of placeholder budget included in this LTP. It might just be a bit hard to say before Christmas what that might be, but I think it could be, sort of that January, February period following that.
January, February will be too late.
Yeah, well, that's what concerns me.
Yeah, so the placeholder budget needs to get put in tomorrow, doesn't it, Kara? Budget's due tomorrow. We can change it, right? But it's I suppose I want to temper the whole, we're not going to necessarily have all the answers to the questions and have solved this before we've necessarily adopted a draft LTP to go out for consultation on. And maybe maybe as officers we're over-egging it and making it a bigger deal than it needs to be. But it feels important because of what has been a split. But are you, David, are we at that stage where can we get a show of hands? Or Sam, sorry.
Well, Monique, I think it's way more. I think it's way more important than what's than what it's been sounded out. And I heard you say about earthquakes, and I even agree with Pity around being Horowhenua specific. We're landslides. That's what we're called. It's the name of us. But we have a liquefaction report that's given us a whole lot of good data about where we shouldn't build. We have continual flooding problems here that escalate every time we have a rain event here. So to actually sit idly and do nothing for me is not appropriate. I would like to see this council potentially adopt a policy around climate change, and it doesn't have to be wordy, big or long. It's just showing that there's a commitment by this council. I think we need to be outsourcing the development of this plan. I think between the Ministry of the Environment and all these other bloody groups out there that are offering money, Horizons are offering money, Te Mano Te Wise there. If we're very specific, we could be applying for funding to help us put together plans for different components of those things that are specific to our needs. So that's all I'm going to say. But I don't consider this to be not important. I think it's critically important, and it is our future.
All I was going to say is it's been a long-standing rule that we don't make decisions in workshops, and we give steers, but it's pretty clear that we have been split. And I acknowledge your point that yes, maybe there's some shifting on that, but I feel like the only way forward is for you to bring the paper to the council, because listening to both you, Mayor Bernie, and you, Clint, there's many things I could say in response where I would offer a counter argument to some of what you've said. And so I feel like it is needed for a debate, even though we might end up in exactly the same position that I suspect we might by taking a thing of hands. But there are some broad considerations that need to be, put into the mix.
Are you happy for, in the background, it to be done so that the staff can keep doing their jobs in the interim? Like, can we debate this in future? Yes, sure. For the question of if we're putting it in, we need to put it in today. Ripping it out's easy later. If in 2 weeks from now we decide we want to rip it out, sure, that's great. Can we agree tonight to put it in?
The other thing, it would help if everybody responded to Lumia, because the 6 undecided are in fact non-respondents. They're not undecided. They could in fact be supportive. So,
I think it's 100% right.
So all I say, there might have been a better direction being able to give if everybody had responded to it. Yeah.
So we'll prepare a council report for the 25th of October, which is the extraordinary council meeting to adopt the annual report, but we've actually got 9 other reports to bring to you. So it's going to be a fun meeting. But I just want to manage expectations in terms of, that's going to be a high-level report that talks to the direction that council set and the chief executive KPI, the questions we have in front of us, and it's essentially going to seek clarification on the 3 things: placeholder funding, continued endorsement of the emissions framework, and the climate action plan. But if you want it to be a detailed report that considers the pros and cons on all of this stuff, you're not going to get that based on the time frame we're working to.
Yeah, can it include the draft climate action plan from 2021 in case we just want to adopt that right there, next extraordinary meeting?
Because, sorry, just to play counter argument to my own argument, for a report, the alternative is, but it gets really late, and then come June next year, people are voting against the budget or this specific line item in the budget, right? That's the alternate. We either do it at the front end, or you get to a situation where someone's either going to have to vote against a specific line item or the whole budget. So if that's where they were sitting. Yeah.
Or when you get to December, on the 13th of December, and we've locked the doors and are not letting you out until we have figured out how we're going to get our rates from here to here. Like through that process, there will need to be refinement on a whole lot of things, and so it's not like the only opportunity for influence, but this is more about direction setting. And remember, at the start of this, council said we want to consider this as part of the long-term plan, so that's why it's been on the table.
So about what's in that report, because not everyone is in the risk committee, it would be great if you could include that natural disaster risk assessment in there. And when you speak of a placeholder, because this is new money, is it 1%? Is it 2% of rates that we're adding? And if so, whatever the amount is, can we get some sort of indication around priority areas, as in that custom to Horowhenua, the specific stuff that we would want to see tackle this up front? Because there's a whole range of the adaptation, mitigation, like there's screeds of this stuff, and so which things are we going to apply that money to first? Without that, I'd struggle making that decision. Well, we've got enough information, which is why I'm asking for that risk assessment to be included.
2% of rates is a pretty huge figure. I was imagining like we're putting in a 100k budget line. Does that change the feel of the table?
No, I said 1%, 2%, whatever it is, it's new money. Yeah, so whatever the placeholder is, I want to understand what it's going to be applied to. What climate change work are you going to, like, because there's a range of things that you can do, like EVs.
And I hear you, Councillor Tupapoa. So if we're not going to be in a position to have a report that covers that for the 25th of October.
Okay, so, yeah, here's some money, do whatever you like with it.
So we're going to spend a whole lot of money that we don't have on something that we can't actually change because it's a natural cycle. But I think that seems to me what's emerged from this too is there's a difference between talking about a climate action plan and actually making or having a plan to deal with what people are calling the fallout from climate change. So to me, the climate action plan seems to be about emission reduction, efficient energy, renewables, all of that. Whereas when you're talking about what you do about natural disasters, which are in the word natural, or natural weather events, then that's different. But the net result's the same. You know, you could turn this town into a model of a climate city that produces no emissions whatsoever. You could do the same thing to the whole of New Zealand, and it would change absolutely nothing. Because it's all about the money. China, Russia, India are not going to do a damn thing about reducing emissions or renewable energy because it's about prosperity. They want their kids to grow up in a world and have a prosperous life. And they're not going to give a monkeys about burning a tyre in their backyard if they can achieve that. It's an opinion piece, but yeah. It's still, bottom line is we're throwing money we don't have at something we cannot change. That's how it seems to me.
Yeah, because Mr. Mayor, I think this is one of the things that I'm concerned about is that anyone listening to this workshop would be thinking by what people have said that council does zero around climate. And that's absolutely a false narrative. Because, for example, when these guys are putting their asset management plans together in terms of stormwater systems, they're taking into account forecasts around rainfall, sizing, drains, all that kind of stuff. Same with the district plan work. There's obviously a lens through which we are already looking around changes and those forecasts. So, like, I just think it's really, I just don't think it's a good message to be sending out that we're doing absolutely zero. And so we do need to be clear about, in terms of the action plan, what do people expect to be inside? What are you actually anticipating? And so maybe that's where the idea of the report to council at the end of October is an appropriate vehicle for people to express their views around what is the purpose of that and what is the parameters and scope of it. And you'll have strong views about how wide it should be, and then others might have views around how narrow it should be. So,
yeah, I think a lot of you should probably go and read a climate action plan from any of the other councils, all of which have declared climate emergencies and are actually doing something. And you'll find that, yes, they do split it into two of mitigation and adaptation efforts, stopping carbon emissions and adapting to the effects of climate change. It's a two-pronged system. It's all pretty clear. The science on climate change is all pretty clear. Yes, we do nothing because we spend nothing. If we spend $0, we're doing nothing. Yes, we might have smart staff who believe in climate change and actually put things about it in their reports and actually consider it. But we as a council invest nothing in it, and wanting to direct staff to invest zero time into it, it's despicable.
Okay, let's wait for the report to come out. We've got plenty of time to debate the issue in a couple of weeks' time. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you. We have just one more piece for you, and Jen is coming up to talk to you about early engagement.
Hello, so moving on to early engagement, I just want to start by clarifying I'm here to talk about early engagement, not consultation, which will be happening next year. You'll see on our lovely picture that we've got up here, consultation is a separate puzzle piece, so we'll be coming to you later in a separate workshop to talk about that. So I'll start with the key messages that we want to share with the community during early engagement. So I've been developing this story with you throughout the previous workshops, and we wanted to put it all together for you here on one page, so you can see it all as one big picture. So as the narrative that we're trying to tell is council's at the beginning of this long-term plan, and we want to check in with the community, tell them what we're planning to include in our next long-term plan, to see if they agree with our focus and whether there's anything else that I think we need to include. Part of the story is, but we're aware budgets are tight for everyone, including us, and our focus is going to be on ensuring that we do the basics well, and that we ensure that we can provide all the basics. We're in an uncertain environment with a number of reforms coming, and our district is continuing to grow at a faster rate than most of New Zealand. The waste management and minimisation policy also needs to be reviewed. So bringing that all together, in this environment, we think the long-term plan needs to be focused on getting the basics right, while fostering our growth and being prepared for the opportunities and the changes that may present themselves. And one part of that is what's called the WMMP. So moving on to our plan about how we're going to approach early engagement. So we're looking at starting on October the 16th, which is this Monday coming, and going through till November the 10th. And we'll be looking at a range of ways of going through this. You told us you wanted to keep early engagement toned down, leaving most of the in-person events until we get to the formal consultation next year. So last week, you may have seen in the community connections we included a small introduction into the LTP and just letting the community know that early engagement was coming. On the 20th of October, we've got a more detailed contribution into the community connections. So this one will include more detail about the long-term plan and how people can provide early engagement. I'll include an intro into the narrative, which I just went through, and what we're currently thinking of our focus will be. We've also taken on your feedback that you've given us previously, and we'll also include the questions that we're going to get to later on in a form that they can drop off here or at our libraries. We've got the Kapu with the Counsellor, which will advertise as a chance for the community to come along and talk to you about the long-term plan, and we'll put out a media release. Monia will also talk to you in a minute about how we're utilising social media in our online platform, it's Korero. So, along with sharing our key messages and seeking feedback on our approach to the long-term plan, we also wanted to take the chance to use this opportunity to improve awareness and understanding within the community about what the long-term plan is, what Council does, and misconceptions about our key issues that we're addressing this time.
I think you're all very familiar with the Let's Korero platform. I just thought I'd just show you what we have in mind for the Let's Korero engagement tool for early engagement. That's not exactly what it will look like, but I tried to cut and copy and paste a little bits and pieces so that you can just get a little bit of an idea of what we have on the Let's Korero page. As you can see, Mayor Bernie is sitting there on the right-hand side. We've started with some videos that we would like to use for social media and on the platform. More about engaging with the community, telling them what the long-term plan is all about and how they can get involved. So we've done a few videos and we will roll it out in the coming 3 weeks. And then obviously we will tell our story there. We will have a survey with the questions that you will agree on. We will have some quick polls. We will give them a platform where they can share their ideas. And yes, that's basically that in short, with a few links and just to get them engaged and to keep them informed. Social media, as I said, we will basically lead the engagement with different social media posts, starting off with the early engagement post with Mayor Bernie, what is the long-term plan and how they can get involved and what is important for them to be involved. Obviously, we will do a lot more for when we do go into consultation and proper engagement, but for early engagement it is basically we will do 2 to 3 social media posts, we will boost them and we will share it with all the different community groups as well to make sure that we do get a lot of engagement. And that is that in short. Social media we will also use some of the polls that we will create and we will ask those questions linking them directly back to the Let's Korero page, and then if we think it's a good idea maybe to include a survey and the questions in community connection for the people who don't use online media. That's basic that. I don't know if you have any further questions on social media or Let's Korero page.
Do you want to ask them before our next council meeting if they think we should spend any money on climate change? If they think we should have a climate change policy, just a yes/no poll. I mean, that'd be pretty telling, maybe.
Are you offering to be one of our TikTok models?
Noted.
Let's move on to the questions, team.
Cool. So we've got all the early engagement questions that we've proposed to ask our community. So I'll just run through them all one by one together, and then we can have a discussion at the end. And you'll also find on your portal, if you prefer, there is a one-pager with all the questions on one page. Might be easier for you to refer back to if you want to. So the first sort of section, we've just got the general direction of the long-term plan. So the first one is Council believes it's important to focus on the basics and doing them right, and setting Council up to take opportunities that will benefit our community. Do you agree with that focus for this long-term plan? The second one, our current community outcomes are vibrant economy, outstanding environment, fit-for-purpose infrastructure, partnership with tangata whenua, and strong communities. Do you think these community outcomes are still right, or should anything else be added? So these ones will both be open-ended questions that people can write a response to. Our third one, so going back to what Rogan was saying, how much of a priority do you think Council should give to climate change? So we proposed to have a scale from 1 to 10. And then question 4, what type of cycleways and mixed-use paths should Council focus on delivering first? So we've got a couple of options here: access to school, access to work and recreation, to see what the preference is for prioritisation there. And then question 5, how much of a priority do you think Council should give on improving infrastructure to make it easier to walk and cycle? Again, on a scale from 1 to 10. Next, we've got our waste management and minimisation questions. So, are you happy with the current transfer station services in Foxton and Shannon provided by Council? Yes, no. Are you happy with the current transfer station services in Levin? Yes, no. Do you support Council starting kitchen scrap collection if you have to pay an estimated $140 per year as part of your rates? Would you support Council starting garden waste collection if you had to pay an estimated extra $120 per year as part of your rates? Would you support Council starting rates funding urban curbside wheelie bin rubbish collection? Again, yes, no. Would you support fortnightly curbside urban rubbish collection if there's a weekly curbside kitchen scraps collection? And then just a general open answered question, is there anything else you'd like Council to do regarding rubbish and recycling? And then that leads us to a final open-ended question, which we'd discussed before around the table. Is there anything else you'd like us to focus on? And that would give the community an opportunity to raise anything additional they would like us to consider. So, there are questions. Any comments? Questions?
Somewhere in that mix, I just wonder if there needs to be some ranking. I can see so many yeses, because again, there's no reference to funding considerations. So it wouldn't necessarily be true of all of them. Looking at some of them, they're fairly mandatory, but I just wonder about the ability for them to rank some of those key things against each other. And just a question, and it's around the detail, but you mentioned the November cuppa with a councillor. Are you saying that the LTP would be a point of focus there and there'd be some structure? At the moment it's drop in and talk to us. Are you saying that maybe there'd be some structure and presentation around the LTP or something there?
No, so our vision for that one was more, we'll just advertise it as a chance to come along to talk to elected members about ask questions and talk about what they would like to see considered in the long-term plan. Still just the general drop-in session.
So I'm assuming with that there'd be some sort of higher level topics, or would you be putting that as an attachment, saying here are the sorts of questions you might want to discuss with the councillors? I'm just trying to understand, as someone who's always doing that, what I'm doing.
Yeah, I think the kind of based on the direction that councillors have given us about tone down the engagement, like we would have framed the narrative and would have allowed the community to get a sense of some of the topics, but really we would be arming elected members through these workshops and some of the material that we're posting on Let's Korero and stuff, to essentially, it would be for you to lead the conversations with those that are turning up at cuppa with a councillor who they might want to know a bit more about what's this WMMP, or what's the trade-off of getting the basics right and managing growth, or it's not like we're not at that point where you'd be discussing the nitty gritties of the draft development contributions policy because we're not there.
Kia ora. I'm just going to talk to these questions. Funny questions. Hold on, I've just got to find the where they were again. I think the framing of the questions are quite interesting, actually. The first 1, 2, 3, 4, I've got an appetite for. The first 3. The fourth one, when it comes to cycleways and paths, I get a little bit lost there, and I sort of wonder, shouldn't the question be, what should the council's focus be? Should it be on better roads or fixing potholes? Because you're being quite specific to cycleways and paths, which I think is only one part of the need. Question 5 around improvements to infrastructure. Again, it's around cycling and walking again. So I'm a little bit lost between 4 and 5. But when you get down to your waste minimisation ones, I don't like the questions at all. I'm more of the opinion, are you happy that we continue to transfer our waste out of the district at this cost? Would there be an appetite for this district to, under our waste minimisation strategy, 1, to manage and maintain our own district waste? 2, is there an appetite to develop a class 1 landfill that actually is going to bring some reduction in cost at the gate? 3, would you consider priority around green waste, food waste? I'm just trying to be a bit more broad and strategic to our waste minimisation strategy. I don't feel like these do that. I like how you put the figure, the $120 if you're going to support a garden waste collection, if that's truly what it is. And I'd probably need to understand how you reach those costs. And same with the wheelie bin service and the fortnightly service and stuff like that. I sort of don't think that even meets the criteria right yet now until we understand actually how our community want to deal with waste. Recycling, that's not in there. I struggle putting glass jars and glass bottles in my rubbish bin because I don't have another place to put it. So that's just me looking at the questions. Thank you, though. I can see the intent. But I certainly think we need to be a bit more focused and strategic in our questioning that aligns particularly around waste minimisation strategy and the outcomes we're actually seeking here for a district, and it's better use, better money value, dollar value, not putting all the costs on our community. If there's ways that the waste minimisation strategy actually take some of that burden away from them. Incentivizations, what sort of incentives are there out there to help people want to recycle, want to, have a compost bin at home and not be putting a bin at the gate to take their food away. I just think about those things. So, but anyway, that's me. Thank you.
Councillor Tamihana, if I, through you, Your Worship, just able to provide a little bit of context that we will be back in front of elected members next week with a more deeper dive into an update on the WMP and likely consultation topics. So in some ways, the workshops we've tailored to date have helped us shape up a couple of key consultation topics that will be taken through the long-term plan process around the landfill in terms of current debt, future debt, and how that's funded, and then also around the existing recycling services and how they're currently funded and the level of service implications. So there's a couple of really chunky consultation topics that will be taken through into the new year that we'll happily share those in more detail next week, but also the emerging themes around the update of the WMP. So the team have done a lot of work in the last couple of weeks to help frame the direction that's been provided through workshops, and we'll be looking to come back and present some of those goals and targets and the measurables around how we actually set about achieving our waste minimisation goals. So in some ways, that strategic conversation will happen next week, and really bringing back what we've heard to date to test that with elected members. And the purpose of some of these questions was almost to try and tone down some of those more strategic things, so we could test the waters a little bit ahead of updating that final WMP and consultation topic. So there's probably a link that you'll connect into some of that strategic work again next week.
Thanks, Dan.
Dan, last time we did the waste minimisation strategy, it was, calling for public submissions, getting the hearings committee together, and then making recommendations to council. So, are we saying that this will be so this will be an all of council strategy that everyone will participate in through the long term plan process?
Correct.
Okay, cool.
So where are we going with the questions? I have similar concerns as Justin, so I'm not particularly a fan of all of them. But what do you need by X time to set these in motion?
When would you need, like, if because we're obviously, probably the first question for council is, are you okay with the general engagement approach, albeit you might not like some of the questions? Then the second bit is, okay, what are the questions you're not a fan of? I think we would, ideally by lunchtime tomorrow, we'd like feedback from, like, if councillors want to send anything through, and then that gives the team tomorrow afternoon time to refine them. I think it would be helpful to probably to get some general agreement that we're probably not going to get consensus by committee on every single question, but if there's a general sense of kind of finding that right, what I'm hearing is a bit of a fine balance between the strategy and the detail, and making sure we're not loading the questions in a way where people think that they can get everything and there's not an impact on it.
Take that point and carefully, careful with the questions and not be leading, right? But I have seen these for the first time, so in order for me to actually give you a decent answer on each one, I can't do that right now. And it's late, and we've just done a chunky open agenda, so I would like till tomorrow if that's possible.
So everyone happy to, if they've got any specific feedback, noting we've heard your feedback, Justin, doesn't mean that everything will get changed, but we'll definitely do our best to reflect that feedback and the changes we make. But if anyone wants to send anything through by lunchtime tomorrow, and putting those the questions to one side, noting that we'll refine them and do our best to take on the feedback. People are comfortable with kind of the approach, how we've interpreted the direction you've given to us around pre-engagement? Or do you want to say something different, more or less?
No, I think you're reflecting what the direction we gave a few workshops ago in terms of that we did want this to be reasonably low key, not too hype out. So yeah, no, especially with the announcements. Well, what's going to happen this weekend? If we start climbing into all sorts of big things that aren't necessarily going to be part of some new government strategy, then we need to relook at them anyway. But yeah, no, comfortable where we're heading.
Cool. So just have a look at our timeline with engagements. So we're starting engagement on Monday, and they'll be running through till the 10th of November. We will bring that feedback to you in the workshop on the 29th of November, and then going from there, a formal consultation will be mid-March to mid-April next year.
Thank you. So we come to the final part of the workshop tonight. Could I have the doofer? Thank you. So what we have heard tonight, just to recap and to talk about the next steps, we've got your feedback and helpful direction for the policies that we talked about in the first part. We'll take that away, we'll draft up the policies, we'll circulate that to you via your portal so you've got an opportunity to read it and provide considered feedback. We'll take that on board and then bring drafts back to Council in December. We've also taken your guidance about climate change, and so we'll be working up the paper to come to the meeting on the 25th of October and providing the attachments as requested. With early engagement, as just mentioned, seeking your feedback and specific questions, feedback by midday tomorrow. After that, next week, the workshop, the quick post-election update, and then as Daniel was just outlining, focus on the WMMP and also looking at the solid waste rating discussion. And that is us.
Starting time for next week.
1 minute caller.
You're putting me on hold. 1:30.